Okay, greatest gift, day 13. As you can see from the title, today isn't going to be an easy one. We're going to talk about suffering. So suffering, so much of the time, is used as an argument against God. It's used to say, okay, if God is all powerful and God is all loving, why does suffering exist? And it is a really good question. We're going to talk a little bit about that now. And one of the first things that we need to understand when we're dealing with this issue of suffering in the world today is that not everything that happens is God's will. You know, God originally created everything to be perfect. He said it was good. He created man in his image and he lived in relationship with them, as we've been unpacking for the past couple of weeks now. But it didn't stay like this. And God didn't want it to go wrong. That wasn't part of what he wanted to happen, but it was a consequence of his creation being given the ability to choose and make decisions. And the thing here is free will. God created us as people to be able to make our own decisions. You know, in the Garden of Eden, he said, okay, don't eat the fruit from this tree. Like, that's what God told Adam and Eve. He told them not to, and they chose to eat it. So they had the choice. They could have chosen to not eat it, or they could have chosen to eat it. And that's what they picked. They chose sin over obedience to God. And so in that choice, in that free will they had, they were choosing to turn away from God. It wasn't God that just pushed them away, but it was Adam and Eve who, by sinning, actively decided to turn away from God. And as a result of that, they then get kicked out of the Garden of Eden, and there's punishments that are then put on their life because of the sin and the fact they're no longer in relationship with God. And so much of the time, I think that when we're dealing with suffering, we say, okay, but if God is all powerful and God is all loving, why does he let bad things happen? And ultimately, it is because not everything that happens is God's perfect will. The kingdom of heaven, the final eternal glory that is eventually coming, that will be God's perfect will. But right now, the world that we're living in isn't actually exactly as God wanted it to be. You know, things have gone wrong because we've made, as people, decisions to turn away from God. The Bible talks a couple of times about the devil as being the god of this world, the devil as being almost in control, because so many people have just given their lives to the devil by actively rejecting God. You know, Jesus says you're either for me or against me. So if you're not actively for Jesus, you are against him, and so you are for the devil. I know that sounds really deep and really intense, but that's what the Bible says. So much suffering in the world is caused by people prioritizing what they think and what they say is right above what God has said is right. And it's the result of that causes so much of the suffering that we see today. There is also a lot of suffering that I can't easily explain. Natural disasters, you know, earthquakes, volcanoes, massive floods, all that kind of thing. I can't explain. That's not an easy question to explain, but the Bible makes it so clear, and we were talking about this the other day, that the struggles and the hard stuff that we go through as Christians in this life is so small in comparison with the eventual goodness and glory that will come. And so yes, we go through difficult stuff. Yes, there is so much suffering in the world and it is painful. But God, like we were saying the other day, doesn't always take us out of the situations. He doesn't always just click his fingers and make the storm go away. But sometimes he provides an anchor in the storm so that we can cling tight to him, so that even when everything looks like it's going really badly and we're surrounded by so much rubbish happening all around us, God has given us this anchor, which is his love, that we can cling to, that keeps us steadfast, that keeps us safe. Even though we're in the situation, even though we're in the storm, we can hold fast to the God who created me and you. And so it's not always about just getting rid of suffering, but so much character, so much personal development occurs in that time of struggling. And I'm not saying God always causes suffering just so that we can grow, but that is a big thing that God uses suffering for, to help us to grow as people, to help us to become more like him. God created us in his image, and Jesus, when he was on the earth, went through so much suffering. The Bible says he was tempted in every way. It says that he struggled so much as he was murdered brutally on the cross. He knows what it's like to suffer. And this is the God who created everything. He knows suffering. And a big purpose of Jesus was so that we as people can relate to him as God. You know, we couldn't do that when God was just in the sky and we're down on the earth. But because of Jesus being a man who came down onto earth and suffered and felt pain and experienced loss in the same way that we do, and in far greater ways than we do sometimes, we can relate to him as God and know that he loves us even though we're going through really rubbish stuff. God's hand is on us and he says, do not fear, for I am with you. I love you. I'm protecting you. And this season of suffering is temporary. There we go. I hope that was helpful. That's all we're going to do for day 13. If you've got any questions about any of this, just leave them down below and we'll try and talk about it more in future videos. But for now, I'll see you tomorrow for day 14.